George Gershwin was born in Brooklyn, New York on September 26, 1898. His parents were Russian Jewish immigrants who moved to New York in the 1890s. When George was a young child, he wasn't interested in becoming a musician, but he did love to listen to ragtime music. He liked sitting outside the clubs in Harlem, taking in the sounds of jazz. He was a spirited boy who was very social and loved to roller skate, play street hockey, stickball, and baseball. He had a reputation for being the best roller skater in the neighborhood. Later, he met a violinist named Max Rosen who introduced him to classical music. His parents bought his brother Ira a used piano. Ira didn't care for it, but George loved it. His first piano teachers were not challenging enough for George, so he started taking lessons from Charles Hambitzer. His new teacher tried to convert George's musical interest to classical music, but George remained faithful to the popular music he loved. His father, who was a businessman, enrolled George into a business school, but he quit when he was 15 to pursue his own career. In 1913, he got a job as a plugger at the Remix Publishing Company. His job was to promote the publisher's music by playing it on the piano so others could hear it. During this era, there was no radio, and most people did not own a record player, so they relied on piano players to introduce the new songs to the people in show business. Later, he started taking lessons from Edward Kylyi, who was a violinist. Edward taught George the art of composition based on the European standards. He also taught him how to orchestrate music. Before long, George was playing his own songs at the publishing house, which made his employer quite unhappy. He moved to the Harms Publishing Company, who agreed to publish his songs. It was a win-win situation. The customers liked his songs and his outgoing personality, and the publishing house flourished. One day, he met a man named Irving Caesar who wanted to write a song with George. In one afternoon, they created the song Swanee, which Al Jolson made famous.
Swanee, how I love you, my dear old Swanee.
He sold over 2 million copies and was suddenly rich and famous at the young age of 19. George's songs were exciting and new. He wanted to represent America, and it was this time that he Americanized his last name from Gershwin to Gershwin. A man named George White wanted to produce some new and exciting Broadway musicals to compete with the Ziegfeld Follies. So he hired George and his brother Ira to write the songs for his shows, which were referred to as the Scandals. George and Ira's songs were an instant success. Americans loved the new sounds of Fascinating Rhythm and The Man I Love.
Fascinating rhythm, got me on the go. Fascinating rhythm, I'm all afraid of birds. What a mess you make him, the neighbors wanna know why I'm always shaking just like a flipper.
George and his brother became a team. They worked extremely well together. The brothers enjoyed painting in their spare time and even lived next door to each other. George's life revolved around music. He would play piano for parties, then come home and compose. He dated many glamorous women, but never married. He said he was too busy. He also enjoyed playing golf and tennis and kept himself physically fit. The one rule he broke was smoking cigars, which he did quite often. Paul Whiteman, a jazz band leader, wanted to legitimize jazz as important American music. He planned to do this by hosting a concert. He asked George to write a piece that combined jazz and symphonic music. George took him up on this challenge and started writing the composition while on a train. The musical piece that resulted was Rhapsody in Blue. He was often inspired by the sounds that were around him. Though the concert itself was criticized for being boring, the audience loved Rhapsody in Blue, and it brought instant fame to George around the world. Before he could take his bows after his first performance, he had to bandage his hands, which were bleeding from hitting his fingers so hard on the piano. George continued to write symphonic music, which included the Concerto in F. George could write songs anywhere, surrounded by people or in his beautiful 14-room studio on his grand piano. However, when he was in a time crunch or just needed to be away from outside distractions, he often rented a room in a hotel and worked from there. One of his favorite places to vacation was Paris. It was this city that inspired him to write An American in Paris, which made his performance debut at Carnegie Hall. The next challenge George met was to produce an opera. George and Ira, along with Dubose and Dorothy Hayward, wrote Porgy and Bess, which premiered in 1935. George actually lived in South Carolina for a prolonged period so that he could authentically capture the nuances of the people and the music in his folk opera.
Oh, I got plenty of nothing, and nothing's plenty for me. I got no car, I got no mule, I got no misery. The folks with plenty.
This opera was not a success because the audience didn't understand it. This disappointed George because he felt this was his greatest work. Today, it is one of the most popular operas in the world. After writing several more stage musicals together, George and Ira embarked on a new dimension of music and wrote several film scores, including a movie called Delicious.
Blah, 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 moo. Blah, 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 above. Blah,
During the
blah,
last
blah,
year of his
blah,
life, George started experiencing health problems that were later diagnosed as a cancerous brain tumor. The doctors attempted surgery but failed. He was only 38 years old. America grieved for the loss of this great American composer in 1937. The funeral was held in New York, and thousands thronged the streets to pay their respect. George Gershwin left behind a remarkable musical legacy.